death toll of now over 4,600 in the conflict between Hamas and Israel, escalating and even reaching Lebanon and Syria. Concerns of a greater regional war are growing. But let's get some analysis, and for that we're joined by Professor John Stremlau, Honourary Professor of International Relations at the University of Witwatersrand. Prof, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think let's start off with your initial reaction to news that Israel is also, had started to bomb areas of Lebanon as well as Syria where there are Palestinian supporters.
Well, you certainly are correct to warn of the escalation risk, but I just can't resist commenting on the previous speaker from the EFF, because this is a free country and we ought to engage in this kind of debate. But I have to support President Ramaphosa's view that is not non-aligned. He has been very clear that South Africa is aligned with the Palestinian people, and that the injustice being done to them is comparable to apartheid down here. That's a very important image to conjure up right now internationally, because there was a consensus against apartheid, and there should be a consensus for a two-state solution. So the way that you would stop this escalation risk that you referred to rightly, and it concerns me, in the fog of war, we don't know what's really going on within Gaza, but nevertheless, it would seem to me that a cooling off and negotiation quietly and pushing in all directions, because neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis have competent visionary leaders who are able to take ownership of this problem and to engage in their own discourse, and with the international community looking on. The fact that the South Africans are aligned with the Palestinians is a plus for me, because the U.S. is aligned with Israel, and I just think that you have to have the two sides work out an arrangement.
Yeah, and so I suppose you then would not support the calls that have been made, not just by the EFF, but by struggle stalwart Dr. Alan Busak as well, that the embassy, the Israeli embassy, should not be in South Africa.
Well, that's not going to accomplish anything one way or the other. The South African embassy has been downgraded in Jerusalem, and that's a diplomatic bilateral issue. It's more important to keep a perspective, in my view, on the broader concern that we have for reasonable voices within Israel, because there are reasonable voices there. I've talked to Israelis who condemn the apartheid-like conditions in the West Bank and Gaza. But right now, a right-wing extremist government is in control. It's got to be removed by the Israeli people. And don't forget, 26% of the voters in Israel are Arab voters. They have civil rights the same, but they're treated as second-class citizens, in some ways comparable to the way African Americans are treated in the United States. But there is a plurality there, a diversity that could emerge with a reasonable leader like Ehud Barak, who almost got a two-state solution back in 1990s to 2000, and when Clinton was leading the effort. But now it's going to have to be a much more multilateral approach, it seems to me. And I think Biden and Blinken are open to that. They're leaning on, as I understand it, I'm just trying to read the tea leaves here. They're leaning on Netanyahu not to do an invasion, because it would be counterproductive. It's a little bit like the U.S. rushing into Iraq after the 9/11 crisis, when W. Bush had a strong domestic consensus and he thought he could act decisively, and look what happened. And so there is a real concern to foster restraint, but also on the Palestinian side, Abbas is 87, and the Hamas leadership is not in any position to negotiate a reasonable solution with the Israelis.
Yeah, I will go back to my original question, Prof, if you'll allow me. We never really got to that one. The concern of, and I know you call it a fog of war, and you're correct. There is so much going on, quite difficult to keep up with it. A lot of it, though, the concern, of course, at this point being around the spreading of the conflict, not just between the Hamas and Israel, but it becoming, fears that it might become a regional conflict, where you've got the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, warning Lebanon's Hezbollah militant group that if it launches its own war, it will cripple it with a force that it cannot even imagine. At this point, we've seen bombardment in parts of Syria and Lebanon. Are you concerned that this is going to be a bigger regional conflict that we're seeing here?
Well, we all should be concerned, but so what? The voice of Ramaphosa, more importantly, with regard to Netanyahu, the pressures that the U.S., I assume, is bearing down on Netanyahu right now, because they don't want to have an international escalation. The Americans fear that above all right now, given the Ukraine war and all the other tensions that are existing. We've got to calm down any possibility of an escalation that could lead to a nuclear conflict. And therefore, I hope the Americans are talking to the Chinese and are talking, well, to the Russians. It's very, very difficult right now, but nevertheless with the Chinese, certainly. And trying to lean on Netanyahu not to do anything foolish. And an invasion of Gaza, which is unfortunately likely, it seems to me. I mean, Israel is still a sovereign state, but it's a theocratic religious state, and they're out for revenge, and that's not good. And so I just pray that the Europeans and the Americans can rein in Netanyahu a little bit, and then the Chinese and the Iranians even might temper Hezbollah a bit. Because no one would gain from an escalation. It's a bad recipe for everybody.
Can we talk about the humanitarian issue here? You've got the aid trucks that have arrived in Gaza. They have been called by some a drop in the ocean in terms of the aid that is actually necessary. I mean, is this also? Is the international community responding with the energy that it needs to be responding to the humanitarian crisis that we are seeing in Gaza?
Well, look, the Egyptians did manage to pull together a very broadly representative group in Cairo yesterday, but they did not issue a formal statement at the end because they didn't agree fully. There was apparently a very good airing of the issues, and I thought Ramaphosa made a very important and compelling speech, drawing analogies to the apartheid regime. And so therefore, we do have to get more relief. Dr. Suleiman of the Gift from the Givers has said that this is a drop in the bucket, and what 20 trucks and now 14, but that, that's and then the day after another 14 trucks came in. Certainly, we have to get the escalation of relief into the Gaza Strip and the desperate situation there, but also there are the hostages issues, and so hopefully cooler heads can prevail, or at least pressures can be exerted by the U.S., by South Africa on the Palestinians, and everybody working in the same direction for a two-state solution to get this conflict behind us.
Yeah, Prof, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Professor John Stremlau, Honorary Professor of International Relations at Wits University.